It's a bit flat. Hello Shad and hello noble ones. Welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking, and this is a reply to Shadiversity. As you know, he has recently published a video on medieval people were not flat earthers, which is a video that I really liked, I very much enjoyed. And one of the things that Shad says towards the very beginning of the video is this.
Most people in the medieval period knew the earth was round, and there's a lot of points of evidence that I'm going to show you in this video.
I'd like to bring forth more points. I'd like to sort of pick up from where you left and add more, because there are so many interesting things to read and so many other things to say about this topic, which is very, very deep, that I thought, you know what, let's just expand a little bit on the great topic that Shad chose. Now, although I agree, generally speaking, with the statement that most people in the medieval period knew that the earth was round, we also need to remember a couple of things. First, the medieval period is huge, and if we're speaking about the late medieval period, then yes, totally. I would say most people knew that the earth was round, also because there were some books that really spoke about this that were printed towards the end of the medieval period, and I'll tell you more about these books that spoke about the shape of the earth in a way that it was easier to be understood by the uneducated masses. But when we talk about the early medieval period, then it kind of depends, because yes, scholars, academics, scientists, people of culture, philosophers, all of these people knew that the earth was round, absolutely. Also because, as Shad himself says,
the idea that the earth was round pre-existed the medieval period.
People in the classical period knew that the earth was round already, and that kind of knowledge wasn't lost. When we are talking about the High Middle Ages, we do have to remember two things. We have mentions from scientists and academics that knew that the earth was round, and they are trying to explain it to people who are not educated and clearly don't know. And secondly, early Christians, so slightly before the medieval period and probably into the beginning of the early Middle Ages, some early Christians didn't believe that the earth was round because of some passages in the Bible that I will mention on this video. So all of this to say that yes, generally speaking, when we look at the medieval period as a whole, I want to say that definitely educated people all knew that the earth was round, and as we go through the medieval period, exponentially more and more common people will also know that the earth was round. As for the remaining people that didn't, it's not that they were flat earthers, it's that they didn't even think about that kind of stuff. At least that's what the manuscripts and treatises tell us.
Bede the Venerable is an Anglo-Saxon monk, and he says this: "Not without reason is the earth called the orb of the world."
Wonderful choice, Shad. The Benedictine monk Beda Venerabilis, who was serving at the monastery of St. Peter's in Northumbria. He did write a lot about the size and shape of the earth, and I'd like to tell you more about it, some of the things he said. So yes, he says, we call the earth a globe, but then he continues and says, the earth is round, not in the sense of a shield, but rather just like a ball, being round the same way in all of its sides. He then goes on talking about why the days can be longer or shorter depending on whether we are in summer or winter, and again he attributes that to the roundness of the earth. Please remember that we are in the so-called Dark Ages. But there are several treatises that talk about the shape of the earth. For example, the earth is round like a ball, and if there were no obstacles, we could walk all around the world like a fly walks around an apple. The most important treaty when it comes to try and understand what the medieval perspective on the shape of the earth was comes from the treaty called De Sfera, written by Giovanni di Sacrobosco. But one thing I'd like to expand on that is the fact that not only this was the standard book in all medieval universities, so everyone knew about this book who was a student or a teacher of some kind of academic, but it was also one of the very first books to be printed in 1471, and it received in 30 years 25 printing editions. Now, this is a significant data because it tells us how much people in the late medieval period were interested in learning things such as what's the shape of the earth. It really gives us a different perspective because the popularity of such a book really tells us a lot about the thirst of knowledge the people in the medieval period had and how much people loved reading. Now let's talk about Christopher Columbus, so Cristoforo Colombo, because I think that when we speak about the earth not being flat, We need to talk about him. Also because his story is probably one of the most misunderstood and wrongly explained stories that have to do with the medieval period. The story of Christopher Columbus is poignant when we're trying to understand whether people believed that the earth was flat in the medieval period or not. Now, I'd like to have a little challenge with you, but you have to be honest to participate. I'm going to tell you what people usually think about what happened to Christopher Columbus when he presented his idea to the royals of Spain, trying to convince them to fund him, and then I'll tell you what actually happened. Please let me know in the comments below how many of you thought that the first story I'm going to tell you was the correct one. Let's give it a try. In the medieval period, if you wanted to get rich, you needed to get your hands on Far Eastern spices. And the only way to do that was to buy them from Arabs, and that would cost a lot of money. And so, yes, you could make a profit, but the Portuguese, the smart guys, found a way to circumnavigate Africa and therefore get these spices themselves at a fraction of the price that they would if they just had to buy them the conventional way, and then they became extremely rich. So everyone wanted to go to India. Christopher Columbus was an illuminated man. With his knowledge, his understanding, and very precise calculations, he realized, believing that the earth was round, that he could just go sail from Spain, go all the way around the globe and reach India, therefore cutting the costs and making the crown of Spain extremely rich. Unfortunately, when he presented the idea to the royals, the Queen of Spain, she had his idea reviewed by the academics of Salamanca. But when the doctors of Salamanca and all the experts of the time reviewed his idea, because they believed the earth was flat, they didn't believe him, and they told the queen not to accept this idea. But luckily, Columbus managed to convince them, and so he sailed, only to find America instead, because nobody knew that America was in the middle. Now here is what really happened. Christopher Columbus believed that the earth was round, just like everyone else. It was common sense at the time. Remember, the printing of all the books that I mentioned had already happened. In fact, Mandeville, 150 years before Columbus, had already mentioned the idea of we could just sail all around the globe. Columbus believed that it would have been easier and faster to go from Spain, sailing, going all the way around and reaching India. The reason why he believed that was because his calculations were completely wrong. He fully botched the job. Now, it is true that Columbus presented his calculations to the doctors and academics of Salamanca. The reason for that is because when he spoke about this to the queen, just like anyone would do in our present day, yes, she has got the money, but she doesn't understand those things, so she's going to ask some experts. The academics review his calculations and find out that he is most likely wrong. But how wrong? Well, Columbus estimated that sailing from the Canaries, and that already is a little cheating if you think about it, but hey, he would have to travel 4,500 kilometers, although he speaks in miles, to reach India. Do you want to know what the real distance is from the Canaries to India? 22,000 kilometers. The only reason why Columbus and all of his men didn't die of starvation in the middle of the ocean is because they ended up in America. So why is the story told the wrong way? But for the same reason the Shad was talking about, we have this idea that medieval people didn't know anything. And so Columbus is always pushed forward as someone who was illuminated and knew what he was doing, but he didn't. He completely botched the job, and we know this. So this idea of Columbus believed the earth was round, but no one else did, and the doctors of Salamanca and all of these medieval ignorant academics thought the earth was flat, and they thought that this couldn't be possible, is wrong. So where does it come from? Oh, we know that, and I can give you name and surname. At the beginning of the 19th century, we have a man called Washington Irving. He was a very popular writer who decided to write a book about the trips, travels, and life of Cristoforo Colombo. He doesn't know what actually happened. The only thing he knows is hearsay about these doctors in Salamanca that were trying to stop Christopher Columbus' idea. So he decides, flat earthers, these people didn't even know that the earth was round, and that's what he writes in his book. Guess what? It becomes a bestseller. Everyone reads this book in 1800s America. As far as I know, and this might need to be double checked, but this story, it's even told this way in some books used at school, even today. To further strengthen and solidify the point that a lot of people in the medieval period, particularly in the late Middle Ages, knew that the earth was round, we should mention and talk about the book that described the travels or journeys of the Knight of Mandeville. Now, this book is it's different from Marco Polo's book because this was completely invented. It was a work of fiction, but it did describe the world and all of these different places where this imaginary knight was traveling, and it described the earth the following way. This is how we can understand that the world is round in shape. We do so through experience and subtle investigation. I'm translating from medieval Italian that if a passage is found through means of ship and people wished to go search through the world, they could do it by going around the world. And you can do that because of the roundness of the world. Now, this book was created in the 14th century and it was an enormous success. So pair this one, which was written for the common people. In fact, it uses kind of crude, very simple language so that it can be understood by everyone. There was this one, and then there were the works of Giovanni di Sacrobosco, which were in all academies, in all universities, and they were used to teach the learned.
Most people in the medieval period knew the earth was round.
Also, we do need to speak about the word round. By the educated people in the medieval period, this word actually became a problem, and we have a lot of treatises and books and mentions of this word being considered inadequate, because when something is round, it could still be flat. Imagine a pizza. And these monks and scholars and academics that write about the shape of the earth start ditching the word round and start replacing it with sphere and orb and ball. Can't get more specific than that. So just for precision's sake, we might want to say that medieval people knew that the earth was in fact a sphere, not just round. Towards the beginning, I mentioned the problem with early Christians. Now, please keep in mind that we're talking about late antiquity, not yet the medieval period, although this problem bled out into the medieval period as well at the beginning. When talking about the shape of the earth, the Bible became a little bit of a stumbling block for some early Christians because they were interpreting it literally. In the Genesis, we have the mentions that God first created the waters and then land appears, which led many people in the medieval period to believe that the amount of water that you had on earth was much more than it actually is, and that only very small, sparse areas of land existed. Well, their mind was changed after the discovery of America, clearly, but they did accept it. But the main problem came from the following verse, Revelation 7:1. And after these things I saw 4 angels standing on the 4 corners of the earth, holding the 4 winds of the earth. So already, if something has 4 corners, it can't really be a sphere, can it? Isaiah 40:22. It is he who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers, who stretches out the heavens like a curtain, and spreads them like a tent to dwell in. So in this representation of the creation, we see that the earth is said to have 4 corners, and then the heavens that God creates are spread over it like a tent. And some people believed that that meant that the notion, the idea that scientists were putting forth that the earth was a globe didn't work anymore. So it is true that some believed that it was flat.
But this does lead into another misconception, which is the idea that the church suppressed, science and education and things like that. Oh, no, actually.
Exactly. So the church and the most prominent people in the church were actually embarrassed about this. And we can read this when we read the words of St. Augustine. He says, there are some Christians that dispute with the scientists and tell them that the earth is not round. I've read the Bible, and there is nothing specific about the shape of the earth. It is clear that the Lord doesn't care about the shape of the earth. He has created it, we'll live in it. And it's ridiculous that we Christians talk about these things that matter not for our own salvation. Leave this to the specialists, and let's believe the specialists. Often a pagan will understand the earth, the heavens, and the movement of stars, because this knowledge he gains through certainty, because it comes from reason and experience. So even though some early Christians did push this idea of the literal interpretation of the Bible, as St. Augustine said, and many other writers in the church did say that if you're educated and you read your texts, there's no doubt the earth is a globe.
you can see how it was based on a vein of logic, and it's them trying to work things out through observation.
The more we study and we read these treatises that come from the medieval period, we learn that medieval people loved reason, logic, and experience. In fact, we find this combination all over the place. And this goes so against what we normally think about these ignorant and superstitious people that it may be difficult for a modern man to accept that logic and reason, mitigated through experience, is a medieval thought. And it may be difficult for some modern people to accept that because we like the idea of we modern people used reason and logic, medieval people were superstitious and stupid. That's not the truth at all. Reason, logic, and experience are the key of the medieval thought process. But the fact that at the beginning, in the High Middle Ages, there was a sort of division between the learned, that knew that the earth was round, and the masses, some of which didn't, is also evident from the texts. In the 12th century, the Treaty of William of Conches comes out, and this is a philosophical treaty written by a theologian of the 12th century. And in this treaty, one of the chapters talks about the shape of the earth, and it says, open quotes, "The problem is that we learned to know this, but how can we explain it to the ignorant?" And so this imaginary discussion between a learned individual that knows that the earth is round, a sphere, and an ignorant that doesn't and thinks that it's flat is then written. And this is what it is. I have some doubts that the earth is really round. Some people are like animals because they trust their feelings and sensations instead of reason. As a fun fact, the ignorant in question is the Duke of Normandy. So how do we interpret this? I think the line can be blurry. We shouldn't consider this as a definite split. Learned people knew the earth was a globe, ignorant masses didn't. This is not what the texts tell us. What they do tell us is that at the beginning of the medieval period knew that the earth was a sphere. The common folk didn't even think about it. So if you were to ask a medieval peasant, what's the shape of the earth? He would probably tell you, no idea, mate. But as we progress in the 1300s, 1400s, we are in the late medieval period, then because of all the books that are now becoming bestsellers that more and more people read, and then the word spreads and people speak about these things, then yes, it becomes generally accepted knowledge that the earth was a sphere. And this really sums it up. Now, if you haven't watched Shad's video on the topic, you will find a link in the description below. Do go check it out and say hello to Shad from me. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please remember thumbs up. And if you're not yet members of this community, become a noble one. Subscribe to my channel for more content from the Metatron. And remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. Goodbye.